Let's transition to feedback, because you mentioned earlier about feedback. I know one of the things that could be able to help high-performing teams is the culture. I want to ask you about what should be in place for teams to have these pro-feedback culture where they long to get feedback, especially tough feedback they may not want to get from others. How can you create that kind of feedback where people are effective in providing feedback that turn into results, and also receive feedback gracefully?
Yeah. Well, let's actually start the opposite way, right? Let's start with receive, because building a feedback-rich culture really depends on how well people perceive their leaders as being receptive to feedback. It's one of the reasons I asked that question about, like, when's the last time somebody disagreed with you, is that if you have a culture where people feel like they can't give feedback up, if it's only ever flowing down, then it's always going to feel negative. Not necessarily even positive feedback. It's always still going to feel like judgment. It's going to feel like grading. We went through that. First 2 decades of everybody's life, we went through a world where all of the adults and the superiors in our life were telling us what we did right and did wrong and what have you. And then we become adults, and we shouldn't be stuck in that same mentality. It needs to be much more collaborative. So the single best thing you can do to create a pro-feedback culture as a leader is to be receptive to feedback. I think about, like, big public examples of this work really well. For example, I don't know how many people are familiar with it, but like Ray Dalio at Bridgewater Associates, there's a famous example of him trying to build a feedback-rich culture. And one of the first things he had to do was he kept encouraging people to give him feedback on his performance, tell him how I'm doing. And then he got an email from just a random associate, nobody all that significant in the organization, that said, "Hey, Ray, I just wanted to give you some feedback. I was in the meeting with you today, and I felt like you weren't even there. I felt like you were phoning it in. I felt like you weren't really paying attention to what the client wanted, and you weren't really giving us anything. And you just you were somewhere else. What's up with that?" And Ray forwarded that email to the entire company and said, "This is the exact type of feedback all of us need to get better. I appreciate you letting me know this," right? Think about what that does to an organization, a very public display of that, right? And one of my favorite other examples, I actually already mentioned him, was Vinet Nair. Vinet Nair was the founder of HLC Technologies, one of the largest, most successful firms in India. It's a global technology, consulting technology implementation firm, right? And one of the things he did was implemented 360-degree feedback even in the executive level. So when he was still running things, they had a system when they did their annual performance cycle. His was open to anyone in the organization, because again, his job was to support everyone in the organization. Anyone in the organization could contribute to his 360 feedback collection. And then he publicly shared all of the feedback, and more importantly, what he learned from it and what he was going to be doing from it, right? So for leaders to build this feedback-rich culture, you have to show people how to receive feedback. And you do that by being very public about it. Not just saying, "I want the feedback," but coming back to the organization and saying, "Here's what I'm going to do as a result."
Before you go forward, I studied Bridgewater, and I love what Ray Dalio did. And actually, Ivy League universities, they studied the culture, radical transparency. I want to ask you, because a lot of organizations, they know that radical transparency or having a pro-feedback culture is important, but we don't see leaders like Ray Dalio opening up and creating that kind of culture by example. And because of that, yes, there are studies, they have all the steps how to create that, but they struggle to do it. What do you think is a very reason why leaders are not setting example? Or do you have any suggestion how to make it easy for them to step up and to start to create that kind of example?
Yeah. Well, I think twofold, right? So number one is we can sometimes be far more protective as a large organization over things like feedback, right? Because we don't want it if our employees are complaining about something, we don't want our competitors to know that, right? I get that. I totally understand that. And so we'll do things like take an annual engagement survey, and then the results are lower than we expected. And so even when we're talking about them inside of the C-suite, we slap confidential on the slide deck and we make sure no one ever knew them. And that's a problem, right? The single best thing, I don't think as a leader, I don't think you have to share everything like Ray Dalio or Vinette Nair. I don't think you have to share everything. But the single thing I think where most of this breaks down, and I see this with so many client organizations of mine, where most of this breaks down is we collect feedback from the whole organization, a pulse survey, engagement survey, 360 feedback, et cetera. And then we implement changes. We do. I've yet to meet a leader who doesn't take that feedback and say, we need to use this to get stronger. I see that all the time. Where the breakdown comes is with sharing it back. And so you can go and share all of it back the way a Dalio or Vinette Nair would, but at a minimum, if you are collecting feedback, you need to go back to the people you asked for feedback and say, here's what we're changing as a result of your feedback. You don't have to go into every single specific and every single complaint, et cetera, but you do have to show them something's happening. I can't tell you, again, I meet so many leaders up here in the C-suite who care about that feedback and want to make a change. And then I also talk to their very same employees in the middle or in the front line who feel like, ugh, there's no point doing this engagement survey because nothing ever changes anyway. Well, stuff changes. They just don't see it because, again, leaders aren't going, here's what we learned from it. Thank you so much. That single thing, right? Showing whether it's Ray Dalio forwarding the whole email or just a random CEO saying, here's the 2 big changes we're making as a result of your feedback. Showing people that you heard them and that you're changing is the #1 way to ensure you're going to get feedback next time.
Yeah, I love it. It's about being vulnerable. And your suggestion is very practical because you don't need to be like Ray Dalio. You don't need to be an open book to start with. You can start with a smaller scale where you feel like, okay, I'm comfortable to share this. And the practicality of what you're suggesting at a smaller scale, at individual level, when we coach individuals, we ask them to take 360 assessment. They take the assessment. One of the advices that we give them is when you return to the organization, why don't you send a short email to the people who gave you feedback? And the first thing you want to say is, thank you for providing the feedback to me. I am going to act on this based on your feedback, and I want to appreciate you. The advantage of being open and saying people thank you for your feedback and showing them that you are taking some steps is they're going to come back again to provide feedback to you. Not only that, they're going to support you because now you told them, okay, because of your feedback, you don't need to act on all feedback, like you said. You can share with them 1 or 2 or 3 things and say that going forward, the next 6 months or the next 1 year, these are the things I want to do. When they see that, if they have any resource or any suggestion, or if they want to connect you with people or offer feedback while you are growing or giving you a resource, they will support you. And I love the practicality and the simplicity of what you're suggesting for leaders to become exemplary, to create that kind of pro-feedback culture. I know I cut you off. You were trying to tell us.
No. Yeah, no, you're dead on. You're dead on. And what you said is everything in line with what I was going to say. That I was just going to add on, and you already hit on it, is that if you haven't figured this out in your leadership journey, when people, like whenever there's a power gap, people self-censor, right? Until you build a high level of trust and psychological safety. So when you ask for feedback, when anything happens, if you haven't figured this out in your leadership journey, you're actually not getting the 100% truth. Right? Whether it's asking for feedback on your performance or whether it's somebody coming to you with a problem, they're not coming to you with the whole problem. They're not coming to you with what they truly think. They're coming to you with a censored version of the thing that's censored to the level that they trust you. So maybe they're trying to minimize the unpleasantness of it or scale down the impact of it or spin it into a positive or something like that because if they haven't built that trust with you yet, they're waiting to see what your reaction is. And so to your exact point, like when you work with executives, you know, okay, the thing we're going to do now is we're going to send them out a thank you note. What they're seeing in that moment is, wow, they didn't bite my head off. They didn't go crazy like a volcano. They didn't fly off the handle. They responded to this well. So the next time they're going to come with a more true version of it because now there's some level of trust and it's going to go on. You're not going to get 100% radical transparency on the first interaction. But when they give you a little transparency and you respond properly, you get more the next time and more the next time and more the next time.
One thing I want to ask you, now I'm a learning professional, but when I had a team, one of the things I did to create that kind of pro feedback culture was that I wanted to create uniformity. And I remember I had a template. I created 2 columns, one column to tell people what went well, to give them specific example, and another column where they share with them what could be done differently. And one of the things I used to do was every month when we have team meetings, I come with printouts. After the meeting for the next 20 minutes, I give everybody, including myself, I tell them, hey, you can pick 2 people today. Here are the templates. Go out and give them feedback. Somebody may grab me and provide feedback to me. And if I have 2 people at the top of my mind to provide feedback, it's powerful because they don't take it personal. I'm just grabbing them because I'm supposed to give 2 feedback today. Do you have any suggestion in terms of, because the challenge is if the leader is providing feedback and graceful in receiving feedback, if it's not duplicated, if not everybody doing it, you cannot have a culture. When the culture is created, one of the things you hear people say is, oh my gosh, I'm not getting any feedback. What's wrong? Because it's a culture. People expect it. If they don't get it, they complain about it. They don't complain because they got. They complain if they don't get, because it's part of their culture. Any tips, any strategies, anything they should do to create that kind of scalability and uniformity?
Yeah. So, it's ironic, right? I always talk about this when I talk about having clear expectations and high levels of accountability. People worry about being seen as a micromanager. And I always say, no, like high performers you can't exceed expectations unless you know what they are. Right. And so you can't be known as a phenomenal teammate unless you know what the expectations of your teammate are. So, the only thing I would say is that I think one of the potential breakdowns in peer-to-peer feedback is that the first thing we need to recognize, kind of like we were talking about with cultures before, the first thing we need to recognize is that people go about their jobs differently. And as a result, like the way that you would want something to be done is not necessarily the way everybody's going to agree with it. So when you are teaching your people to give each other feedback, to develop that sort of feedback-rich culture, you have to make sure that feedback is, that the power in receiving that feedback is still with the recipient. I'm a big fan of, for example, Pixar and the brain trust and the idea of giving feedback. What they also say, it has to be plussed. You have to add a plus, right? And the idea is that I can give you constructive criticism. I can tell you what's going wrong. I can tell you where you're disappointing the team. I can point out negative things, but I have to give you a plus. I have to add my own suggestion, right? So this would be, what worked well is great, but there's no action to that. And then I have to give you an even better if, hey, what if you tried this? What if you did it this way? But in the end of any brain trusted Pixar, in the end of any plussing session, the person receiving the feedback still has the right to accept or reject the feedback. Right. So the idea here is I'm giving you this feedback because I'm a peer. I don't have the authority to make you change. If I'm a boss, it's different. Because I'm a peer, I have to say, these are just my suggestions on the ways to do it. Not how I would do it. Although if you want to say that and make it just goes, but I have to give you the right to accept or reject that feedback. And I think too often the reason feedback breaks down inside of teams peer-to-peer is that people are just giving feedback as if this is the best way to do it. No, that's your way to do it. And I appreciate learning about your way to do it. But if I try your way to do it and I decide I still sort of don't like it, you have to surrender the right to get mad at me because I found a way that works better for me. Does that make sense? Like that. So that
yeah. I like the balance. You're right. Yeah, because you're right. There is a danger. If you are dictating the how, that becomes very hard. It becomes micromanaging.
Right.
What you should do is just give them the skill set, maybe role play with them. Especially one challenge I have seen is that even if you have a pro feedback culture, when somebody is introduced into that team, this person doesn't know when we started this culture and they may struggle. And then maybe you need to give them a little bit role play to show them how it's done. But like you said, afterward, depending on the person they are giving feedback and the situation and the timing, they should have that ability to customize and give feedback so that it feels like natural. It feels like them, and I appreciate that.
And that's not to say you tell people don't give hows to teammates, right? But just respect that, like, you know, basically, if you did something totally wrong in a meeting, 3 people are going to come to you with feedback. Each of those hows are going to be slightly different. And now your job is to receive the feedback for sure, but then your job is to figure out which of those possible remedies works best for me. And in selecting one or combining, like, I'm going to disappoint 2 people if I pick one. And if I do what most people do, which is take all 3 and then come up with a 4th option that works best for me, now everyone's disappointed? No. Surrender your ego, right? We want your feedback on what's going wrong, and we want your suggestions. But if you're not someone's like authoritative boss, you don't have the right to make them act the way you want them to act. You just have to show the desire that you're trying to help them. And if this works for you, great. If it doesn't work for you, great. Right. And so I think that's a lot of us need to kind of surrender our egos when giving feedback.
Yeah, I can imagine if a leader has ego, it would be hard for them to receive feedback, because psychologically they may think, I know everything. You just joined my team. You know, I have the authority. I know how things are done. Who are you to give me feedback? You're right. They have to set that example. And I love everything should depend on the leader setting the tone, not micromanaging, but setting the tone. And I love that.